Most people who come to Prague have no idea that this city was also bombed during Second World War. In this video, we're going to show you the areas that were affected by bombings and also talk about who bombed Prague. Our first stop will be Holešovice, one of the most popular Prague's districts for living. Surrounded by parks, this area is full of coffee shops, alternative fashion stores, bars and art galleries. And it is on the complete edge of Holešovice, where we can find Holešovice power plant, the place of our first Prague air raid stop. On the 10th of November, a single heavy bomber B-17 of the 15th United States Army dropped 12 air bombs at Holešovice power plant. Circumstances to why exactly here are till today unknown. It is possible that their target was the nearby bridge. 2 buildings of the power plant facilities were damaged, as well as 16 other apartment buildings in its vicinity. It is estimated that 4 people died and 85 were injured. We are now in Prague 5 Radlice, and the small chapel and monument remind us of the worst bombing in Prague's Second World War history, called Valentine's Day bombing. On the 14th of February 1945, a group of 62 American bombers dropped 152 tons of air bombs on Prague. The entire air raid lasted 9 minutes and destroyed and damaged more than 2,500 houses. More than 700 people were killed and 1,184 injured. All of this damage was done by an accident. The group of bombers was originally supposed to bomb Dresden, but on the day of the bombing there was a really strong wind and heavy clouds. On top of that, the radar used for navigation stopped working. When the weather finally cleared out, the navigator saw a city that looked to him like Dresden, with a similar train network and a river in the middle, and they decided to drop the bombs there. But the area that was damaged the most during that air raid was not Radlice. It was Vinohrady and Newtown. Vinohrady was one of the most affected areas during the Valentine's Day bombing. That might be surprising to a lot of you, especially if you live in Prague and you live in this area today, because there is almost no way of finding out anything like that ever happened here. Out of 2,500 houses that were damaged or destroyed in Prague during this bombing, about half was in Vinohrady. Historically, one of the most important buildings in Vinohrady that was destroyed during the air raid was a synagogue. It used to stand here at the site of nowadays school. The synagogue could have been repaired, but the Communist Party had no interest in it, and they decided to tear it down despite the protests from the Jewish community. Not all the victims of this bombing were accounted for immediately. Some of them were assumed dead. Some bodies were discovered days and weeks later, and some bodies were discovered 26 years later. That was the case of this house on Vinohradska Street, where in the cellar of the house in 1971 they found 23 bodies of the victims of this bombing. A question that we get a lot connected to the bombings is, were there any bomb shelters people could hide in? Yes, there were. There was even an air raid siren, but there were multiple factors that led to so many deaths on that day. Number one is that people lived under the impression that the Allied bombing would avoid them somehow, so they either hid too late or didn't hide at all. And number two is that day the sirens went off late. Another area affected by Valentine's Day bombing was the new town of Prague. Many of you are familiar with this building, Dancing House, created by Vladimir Ilyich and Frank O'Gary. But not many of you might know that instead of this house there used to be an apartment building that was destroyed by the bomb in 1945. Or just a few blocks away from here you can find this church. It is part of a beautiful monastery complex founded by Charles IV in 14th century. The tower of the church was destroyed and later completely completely rebuilt. And have you been to Vyšehrad? This beautiful fortress, which was once upon a time a medieval castle, has today these beautiful statues standing in the middle of it. Originally, the statues were standing here on Mozart's Bridge, nowadays Palackého Bridge. After Valentine's Day bombing, they were moved to Vyšehrad, where they stand till today. It's time to abandon Valentine's Day bombing and move to another part of Prague that just 1 month later was bombed by around 500 planes. To get there, you need to take a metro to the stop called Kolbenova, named after Emil Kolben, who was a Czech inventor and an industrialist who also co-worked with Nikola Tesla and Thomas Alva Edison. Emil Kolben established a factory here in 1896, and this factory became one of the main targets during the third air raid done by American bombers. It happened in March 1945, just 2 months before the end of the Second World War in Europe. Americans decided to target this area for a reason. Some of the factories here produced useful equipment for Nazis, like tanks and other combat vehicles. And nearby from here were Letňany and Kbely airports, which were also used by Nazis and were determined as valuable targets. The air raid took place on Sunday. That way the American leadership wanted to minimize the civilian casualties. The problem was that around the airports were the residential areas, and where we are, for example now, in Kbely, 75% of houses were damaged or destroyed. People knew that they needed to hide, but they didn't trust the shallow cellars of their houses and ran into the fields. And that's where the shrapnels from air bombs hit them. This monument right here says that 137 people died that day, but some historians argue that the numbers might have been even larger than that. So here you go, guys. These were the areas that were affected by tactical bombings the most during Second World War in Prague. We of course didn't talk about Prague uprising in this video, but we will save it for the next time. See you next week.